Imagine this. Company that once controlled 1% of the entire U.S. economy now reduced to just 5 stores. It's not 500, not 50, 5. For over 140 years, this brand defined how America shopped. Your grandparents trusted it. Your parents grew up with it. Entire cities were built around it. And yet today, it is almost gone. This was not a sudden crash. There was no single explosion, no viral scandal, no overnight collapse. Instead, this was something far more disturbing. Slow, deliberate dismantling of a retail empire worth tens of billions of dollars. It's a company that wasn't killed by Amazon, but quietly destroyed from the inside, store by store, asset by asset, decision by decision. This is the story of Sears, a giant that didn't fall, but it was taken apart. To understand how shocking Sears' collapse truly was, you first have to understand what Sears once represented. This was not just a retailer. For most of the 20th century, Sears was American commerce. Founded in 1892, Sears pioneered something revolutionary for its time, a massive mail-order catalog that could deliver nearly anything to anyone, anywhere in the United States. Clothes, tools, appliances, even entire houses. Yes, Sears once sold ready-to-build homes, shipped by rail, to families across the country. By the mid-1900s, Sears had become the most powerful retailer on Earth. At its peak, it was responsible for roughly 1% of U.S. GDP, a level of dominance almost unimaginable today. Sears didn't just follow American families as they grew. It grew with them. When suburbs expanded after World War II, Sears followed. When shopping malls became the center of American life, Sears became the anchor. Its private brands, Craftsman, Kenmore, Die Hard, were trusted without question. Sears appliance wasn't trendy, it was dependable, and that trust lasted generations. In 1973, Sears crowned its dominance with the tallest building in the world, the Sears Tower, a physical monument to corporate power. At its height, Sears operated thousands of stores, employed hundreds of thousands of workers, and generated tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. For decades, there was a simple assumption in America: Sears would always be there. Which is exactly why what happened next felt impossible. Every corporate collapse has a moment where the future quietly changes direction. For Sears, that moment came in 2005. That was the year a struggling discount chain called Kmart acquired Sears in an $11 billion merger. On paper, it was sold as a comeback story. Two broken retailers combining forces to challenge Walmart and the rising threat of Amazon. But behind the headlines, something far more dangerous happened. Control of Sears was handed to a hedge fund manager, Eddie Lampert. Wall Street loved him. Lampert was disciplined, analytical, and obsessed with numbers. He believed companies should be broken into internal units that competed against each other, just like stocks in a portfolio. To investors, this sounded brilliant. To a retailer built on trust, consistency, and customer experience, it was catastrophic. This is where everything went wrong. Lampert didn't see Sears as a living retail ecosystem. He saw it as a collection of assets. Stores became balance sheet entries. Employees became costs to be reduced. Customer experience became secondary to quarterly cash flow. Instead of investing in store upgrades, logistics, or digital transformation, Sears began selling itself piece by piece. Prime real estate was sold off. Iconic brands were spun out. Maintenance budgets were slashed. The logic was simple: sell assets to stay alive. But each sale made the company weaker. Stores became darker. Shelves emptier. Customers stopped coming, not because prices were too high, but because Sears no longer felt like Sears. Internally, departments were forced to compete against one another for resources. Collaboration disappeared. Morale collapsed. This was not incompetence. It was ideology. A belief that financial engineering could replace retail fundamentals. Sears didn't fail because it didn't know what customers wanted. It failed because leadership stopped caring. By the time the consequences became impossible to ignore, the damage was already irreversible. The empire was still standing, but the foundation had already been hollowed out. The backlash against Sears did not arrive with hashtags or trending scandals. It arrived quietly. That made it far more dangerous. There were no viral apology videos, No sudden boycotts, no redemption arc. Instead, customers simply stopped showing up. Longtime shoppers walked into Sears stores and felt something was wrong. Broken fixtures, empty shelves, outdated layouts that looked frozen in another decade. Service declined. Returns became frustrating. Trust, the one thing Sears had built over generations, began to evaporate. Former employees started speaking to the press. They described internal chaos, collapsing morale, and departments fighting each other instead of serving customers. Retail analysts took notice. On financial television, Jim Cramer openly questioned how a legendary brand could be allowed to deteriorate so visibly. The tone wasn't outrage, it was disbelief. Industry experts like Neil Saunders described Sears as a company being slowly drained of life, warning that asset sales were masking deeper structural decay. Mall owners felt the impact too. When a Sears store failed, foot traffic collapsed. Entire shopping centers suffered. Some malls never recovered. Yet inside Sears, leadership remained unmoved. There was no public reckoning, no dramatic reversal, no urgent reinvestment in customers. The silence became the message. What made the backlash so brutal was not anger, it was abandonment. Customers didn't protest Sears, they forgot it. And in retail, indifference is fatal. By the time the company realized the public had turned away, there was no crowd left to win back. At some point, emotions no longer matter. Numbers do. And the numbers behind Sears tell a brutal story. In the early 2000s, Sears was still generating over $50 billion in annual revenue. It operated more than 3,500 stores across the United States. It employed hundreds of thousands of people, and the decline accelerated. By 2015, revenue had fallen to roughly $25 billion. Just 2 years later, in 2017, it dropped again to $16.7 billion. The losses were relentless. Between 2011 and 2017, Sears burned through more than $10 billion in cumulative losses. In 2016 alone, the company lost over $2.2 billion. Store closures became routine, from thousands to hundreds to dozens. By the time Sears filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2018, only 687 stores remained. The balance sheet told the final truth. Assets: approximately $6.9 billion. Liabilities: more than $11 billion. The math no longer worked. After bankruptcy, the collapse didn't stop. It accelerated. Stores dropped below 100, then below 50, then below 20. Today, only 5 Sears stores remain in the entire United States, and one of the largest employers in the country. To a rounding error in retail statistics, this wasn't a bad quarter. It wasn't even a bad decade. It was a sustained financial freefall, played out slowly, publicly, and relentlessly. And the numbers make one thing clear. Sears was not declining. It was bleeding out. Sears did not collapse because of one bad decision. It collapsed because its entire strategy was built on the wrong assumptions. At the core of Sears' failure was a fundamental misunderstanding of what a retail business actually is. Retail is not finance. Retail is not real estate. Retail is not a spreadsheet. Retail is a relationship. And Sears systematically broke that relationship. 1. A total disconnect from the customer for decades. Sears' greatest strength was trust. Customers believed Sears would deliver reliable products, fair pricing, and consistent service. But under cost-cutting leadership, stores deteriorated. Instead of reinvesting in cleaner layouts, modern displays, and better staff training, Sears let its stores decay. Customers didn't leave because Amazon was cheaper. They left because Sears stopped caring. Once that emotional connection was broken, price and convenience became irrelevant. 2. Financial engineering replaced retail fundamentals. Leadership believed value could be unlocked by selling assets. Real estate was sold. Iconic brands were spun off. Short-term cash was generated. But every asset sale reduced Sears' ability to compete. Retail requires constant reinvestment. Sears chose liquidation over innovation. This created a vicious cycle. Sell assets to survive, gives weaken the business, gives need to sell more assets. Eventually, there was nothing left to save. 3. Internal competition destroyed collaboration. Departments inside Sears were forced to compete against each other for resources, budgets, and profits. In theory, competition drives efficiency. In retail, it destroys coordination. Marketing fought merchandising. Merchandising fought supply chain. No one fought for the customer. Instead of functioning as a single brand, Sears became a collection of disconnected silos. Customers felt that fragmentation immediately. 4. The digital transition was misunderstood. Sears didn't ignore e-commerce. It misunderstood it. Leadership treated online retail as a channel problem, not a business transformation. Amazon didn't just sell products online. It rebuilt logistics, data systems, and customer expectations. Sears never matched that level of commitment. Digital wasn't underfunded by accident. It was underfunded because leadership didn't believe retail innovation mattered. 5. Culture collapse sealed the fate. When employees stop believing a company has a future, performance collapses. Talented people left, remaining staff disengaged, execution suffered. At that point, even a perfect strategy would have failed. Sears didn't just lose market share, it lost its soul. Once that happened, the collapse was inevitable. When companies collapse, there is usually a moment of accountability. At Sears, that moment never came. There was no dramatic CEO resignation, no public apology, no clean break from the strategy that had failed. Leadership remained in place as the business continued to shrink. Year after year, store closures were announced. Layoffs followed. Entire regions lost their Sears locations, sometimes overnight. Inside headquarters, the message was consistent: cut costs, sell assets, survive another quarter. But survival came at a price. Veteran executives left quietly. Retail talent avoided the company altogether. Decision-making slowed as fear replaced confidence. Board meetings became defensive rather than strategic. The focus was no longer on growth, customers, or innovation. It was on damage control. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of employees paid the price. Careers built over decades disappeared. Pensions were threatened. Communities lost not just stores, but stable employers. When Sears finally filed for bankruptcy in 2018, there was no shock inside the company. Most people had seen it coming for years. The tragedy wasn't that leadership failed, it was that leadership refused to change. By the time Sears collapsed publicly, the internal collapse had already been complete. The empire didn't fall from the top, it collapsed from the inside out. Sears did not just leave behind empty stores, it left behind warnings. The first lesson is uncomfortable, but undeniable. You cannot cut your way to relevance. Cost reduction is not a strategy. It is a temporary delay of failure. Sears treated investment as waste and customers as numbers. In doing so, it traded long-term loyalty for short-term liquidity and lost both. The second lesson is even more dangerous. Leadership mindset matters more than intelligence. Sears was not run by fools. It was run by people who believed financial discipline alone could replace customer obsession. Retail does not reward optimization without empathy. It punishes it. When leadership stops visiting stores, listening to employees, and caring about experience, the brand begins to rot. The third lesson is perhaps the most universal. A brand dies the moment it stops fighting for its customers. Sears didn't insult its customers. It did something worse. It ignored them. Customers always notice when they no longer matter. For entrepreneurs, executives, and investors watching this story, the message is clear. If a company that once dominated an entire nation can collapse this completely, no brand is too big to fail. Sears believed its legacy would protect it. The market proved otherwise. Sears didn't disappear overnight. It faded while everyone was watching, and most people didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Now, the question is yours. Was Sears doomed the moment it merged with Kmart, or could a different kind of leadership have saved it? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you want more deep, shocking stories about iconic companies that collapsed from the inside, make sure to subscribe. And if this story interested you, you'll want to watch what happened to Macy's, Bed Bath & Beyond, and Toys R Us next. Because Sears wasn't the last, it was just the warning.